You know how introducers say there's a person who needs no introduction. And that's clearly true of our guest today, Nancy Hornberger. But since it's my role, and since I rarely have the opportunity to introduce Nancy, I am going to do it with the best style that I can manage. And so some of this will come, the first part will come from information that if you Googled her, you'll find all over the place, because she's a public figure in the area of language and planning and bilingualism and multilingualism, as most of you already know, and some of you have already taken classes with her. And I know many of you would have liked to have taken classes with her if they could have gotten in or had a free elective to do so. Her work, broadly speaking, is in the area of bilingualism and biliteracy, ethnography and language policy, Indigenous language revitalization, all areas where if you Googled those words, you'd probably find Nancy Hornberger's name popping up pretty quickly. When I first knew Nancy, when she joined the faculty, we were both a bit younger then. She was mainly focused on work in the Andes and being a Quechua speaker, in particular Bolivia and Peru and Bolivia. But since I've bumped into her all over the place, including South Africa, maybe Brazil. I don't know all the different countries, but she has been around. If we compared passports, which you've never done, it would be an interesting combination. Nancy, among other things, has not only been a stalwart here in the Educational Linguistics program, but also more broadly at the university on all that is international and global, and in particular around developing countries, and within that domain, interests in indigenous peoples and poverty. So a person who really has, I think, been an essential element of what, certainly what IEDP as a program seeks to do, but also I think what Penn more broadly seeks to do in terms of its global engagement, to make a difference, to try to add improved equity, reduce inequity in the world. The list of her accomplishments are way too long. I recommend you just Google her. There are innumerable articles and certainly and books as well. I think probably most importantly, well, I shouldn't say most of it, one of the very important pieces of her contribution here has been the Ethnography and Education Forum, which just occurred last week, in which she was, I guess, 17 years the motor behind that, which is not a small thing. And those of you who were here for that, I mean, it's a huge event. It's a very big event, not only for the School of Education, but also for the university at large. It is one of our most singular international events that's happened every year, going back almost to the point when we first got here.
Before?
Which goes back a ways. Nancy also was one of the faculty members with whom I worked most closely in creating the IEDP and its predecessors in terms of the global activities of the Graduate School of Education. We've commiserated and combined positively in much of what has gone on here over time, and though she hasn't maybe been quite as visible to some of you in IEDP, just because she has other activities she has to do, but she's been one of the people who is really can be called one of the founders of IEDP here at the Graduate School of Education. I guess, again, there's more that I could say, but I want to, I guess, add also on a personal note that Nancy Hornberger has been one of those, I think, unusual academics who has cared intensely about how well students do. Both at the master's and Ph.D. level, there is nobody who I think has committed more of her time to working with students and mentoring them, not just in her own program, but across the school, And that's something that I think we on the faculty side, I mean, I hear this from students a lot, but even we on the faculty side appreciate a lot, because it's easy for us to fly around the world and not be around. But, and Nancy does plenty of that too. I never really understood how 24 hours was the limit on her days, because it seemed like she really had 36 hours to work with. But anyway, I could say more, but it would all be even more embarrassing than what I've already said. So I'm not even sure if I have the title of your talk today.
No, I was never asked for one, which was sort of a nice...
Just made the assumption that anything out of your mouth would be pearls of wisdom.
But you'll see it in a minute, the title.
To Nancy Hornberger, and the title, which will soon be ours, and to the papers, which are already up on the website. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I knew when Dan said he was introducing me, I'd be in for a treat, and I was. Thank you, Dan. Here's the title of my talk. Thoughts. It's a kind of a tentative title. I'm using this opportunity, and I'm grateful for this opportunity, actually. I thought of many different ways to approach it, and I consulted with Amina too late to ask her, should I be doing a formal talk, as I know you often have in this time slot. But Amina assured me, and I was leaning this way, and then at lunch we had it confirmed that informal is okay for this context. And since I knew you had been assigned 2 readings that you would read, I didn't want to just spout back to you what you had already just read. So I decided to use the opportunity to think with you. I've done a little prior thinking, but I'm hoping that you will help me think comparatively across 3 contexts that I've been most recently, well, actually, I've been working on different time scales in these 3 contexts. I'll tell you about that in a minute. As contexts of Indigenous language revitalization, and some of the things that I think we can see across them, some differences, some implications. And it's something that I have actually been thinking for several years that I would like to eventually write a book about. And so this is sort of, thank you for the opportunity to help me start actually thinking about what that might look like. So that's where we are. Thoughts on 3 contexts of Indigenous language revitalization. And language revitalization, I'm using a definition that one of my students and I wrote about back in the 1990s. We were taken by a phrase that actually we heard Gisela Ernst and Rosemary Henze use at an anthropology meeting in 1995, where they talked about bringing a language forward. Revitalization as bringing a language forward, not bringing it back. Not sort of like bringing it back to life, but bringing it forward with the speakers of the language. That's the sense in which I think about revitalization of a language. And so I'm going to, since you had a chance in the portraits paper to read about, these are the 3 contexts that I'm going to be talking about: the Andean, the South African, and the Scandinavian Sapmi context. And I thought it would be nice in this context for you to see photos from those 3 contexts, along with a very brief summary of the multilingual language policy that was in all those cases was sort of the invitation for me to do work there. And after we sort of take an overview like that, then I have some reflections, and then I want to open it up for conversation with you all. So let's see if that works. So these photos are kind of an opportunity for you to also review what you read a little bit. So starting with the Highland Andes, and maybe there's a slide that I couldn't decide where to put it, whether I should put it here or at the end. I think now that I'm speaking, it's probably appropriate for me to mention what's on that slide. I put the context in this order, which is the order of my engagement with them. So in the Andean context, I've been engaged ethnographically and through ethnographic monitoring since the 1970s. In the next one, South Africa, it's since the 1990s, and in the last one, the Sapmi, it's really just since the 2000s. So we're seeing different timescales of engagement here, and that's how I've ordered the pictures. So some of the policies that have been in play in the Andes around Quechua are these that I've summarized here on your on the PowerPoint. There was a major policy for the officialization of Quechua in 1975 in Peru during the time when I was living there, which really became an impetus for me to even get involved in this field. And it was part of a series of reforms in the 70s that also included an education reform. But other policies emerged that were in favor of the use of Quechua in schooling in Ecuador in the 1980s, in Bolivia in the 1990s, and then more recently I've been sort of back in Peru, especially with one of my doctoral students who's there right now doing her field work, Frances Kvietok, whom some of you know because she's been very involved with IEDP, or IEDD, IEDP.D, where up till, the first three that I'm mentioning there are really emanating from the national level and being sort of implemented in various ways across the nation. This last move in Peru has emerged, there have been some regional Quechua language policies emerging, which is a part of a decentralization move in the Peruvian government, and an interesting new place to take a look at how the Quechua language is being used in schools at the regional level. So that's just a sort of a panoramic view of some of the policy context in the Andes. Maybe I should just say that in these contexts, Quechua is the major indigenous language, but all of these policies also speak to other indigenous languages, including Aymara, another highland language, and also many, many Amazonian languages in the hundreds. But I talk about Quechua, and we'll say more about that down the line. So here's some to put you in the context. Just enjoy the photos. This is the portrait that you read about Neri Mamani. Here she is. Now, apropos of our conversation at lunch about people's identities, these are the three portraits that you read are real people. They're not composites. Those are indigenous language activists who really wanted their names to be used, wanted their identities to be, whole as they are, and were involved in the writing of the paper. Or I should say they gave me lots of feedback on the writing of the paper. And these photos are also truly their photos of them. Where did she go? So here's Neri at the beginning. And this one reason I'm showing these here is because I don't put them on the web or whatever. They are, you get the chance to see Neri in her classroom working with her colleagues. This is the university where she was studying. This is the sort of part of the world where she was teaching and doing teacher professional development. A little of I'm sure you've heard of llamas and alpacas. There they are in their natural habitat. This is, and you may remember that I talked about her putting on her traditional dress. This is the dress that she's referring to. It's a very well-known style of dress from that region, a very beautiful style of dress. So I'm just giving you sort of a panoramic look here. Here's some evidence that I was actually there. We were interviewing each other. Here's a local festival. This is Cusco. Have any of you actually, Cusco is a big tourist place. Have any of you visited Cusco? Yes. No. So put that on your bucket list, as they say, of places to visit. So a little bit of the agricultural terrain, the terracing that the Quechuas are famous for in agricultural production. Cusco City. One more in the classroom context. So moving to KwaZulu-Natal and the isiZulu language, where I started to have some involvement in the 1990s up to the present. So, and that also coincides with the end of apartheid, the new South African constitution that I know many of you are probably very well aware of, which included recognition of 9 African languages along with English and Afrikaans as part of the constitutional, the new constitution, recognizing language as a basic human right, multilingualism as a national resource. And a lot of policy has ensued from that, including language institutes for each of the 9 African languages, involved in research and dissemination of the languages, and the isiZulu being one of those. There's a lot of, well, I shouldn't go into that. The university where I was working with Nobukhle, another portrait that you read, has its own language policy that you also read about, and this sort of summarizes the ways that they were framing why they wanted to implement isiZulu as a language, as a medium of instruction in the university, partly in recognition that 80% of their population, of the population of the province, speaks isiZulu. So here a little bit of the context there. Here we have giraffes, not llamas and alpacas. This is some of the sort of modernizing beach of Durban, where the university is located. This shows, I took this to show the renaming of streets with isiZulu names, or recognizing isiZulu leaders. I'm not actually sure who Joseph Nduli or Maud Mfuzi are, but those are recognizably Zulu names. Certainly St. George's is a recognizably colonial name. This is on the campus of the university. The trees were wrapped that way. I was there just after, guess what? The World Soccer Cup. So these trees were wrapped as part of their enthusiasm for the soccer cup, hoping to win the soccer cup. This is the main administration building, or not, I'm not sure it's the main administration building, but it's one of the main building icons of the University of KwaZulu-Natal that harks back to its colonial and white, it was a white serving institution until the period of that I document there in the paper, 1990s, 2000s, when it became much more mixed and intent on serving a broader population. So that's Nobukhle that you read about in her office. Someone pointed out to me when I presented this that, do you recognize the flags that are behind her? Yes.
That's the Sami flag?
That's the Sami flag on the right. And the KwaZulu-Natal flag in the middle. I had not really thought about that when I took the photo, but there it was. So she has also, in her international work, identified with other indigenous language movements around the world. These are some of the professors at the university that she's working with. These are more scenes from the university. A seminar. People that I was working with in that ethnographic monitoring project that you read about. These are actually health sciences faculty. Oops. And a little bit of local art. Sapmi, the region of Sami speakers in Scandinavia, where I started work in the 2000s thanks to the invitation of a professor at the University of Umeå, where Hanna is now a lecturer, having completed her Ph.D. At the time I wrote the piece on her, she was working on her Ph.D. So that was a good benchmark that she reached. And there's a long story behind that, too. So in the Sapmi context, the languages, both Isizulu and Quechua, are spoken by an estimated 10 million speakers each. And Sami is a much more visibly endangered language with 9 different varieties with a total of something between 70 to 100,000 speakers. So many fewer speakers, less. The 9 varieties are not mutually intelligible. Among Quechua varieties, a lot of them are mutually intelligible. So Sami is a much more obviously endangered language with fewer speakers and more varieties of the language. This is showing the national flags of the different national countries in which Sami is spoken. And I focus particularly on Sweden, which is where I've been able to do some work. And so I'm showing you a little bit here about the policies in Sweden. The most recent of which is this National Minority Languages Law of 2009, which recognizes at the bottom there the 5 national minority languages of Sweden: Yiddish, Romani, a particular variety called Chib, Sami, Finnish, because of the Finnish Swedes, Finnish-speaking Swedes. Because of the history of Finland and Sweden as such a contested border, there are speakers of Finnish on the Swedish side and speakers of Swedish on the Finnish side. And in Sweden, the Finnish speakers are recognized as one of their minorities. And the Meänkieli are also, that's another sort of, as I understand it, a variety related to Finnish. So Sami, Finnish, and Meänkieli all have some sorts of language histories in common, but they are separable languages. And so this 2009 law replaces, this earlier part of this PowerPoint is meant to show that there have been, since the 1980s, various policies providing more recognition of Sami rights, including land rights and the creation of the Sami parliaments, a degree of self-governance. It's all very complex. I'm still learning about it. And it's one of those policies that looks good from outside, and then when you get inside and start to really understand how it's being played out in local places, and that's true of the minority languages law also. There are some openings through these laws, but there are also many contradictions and constraints in making them actually play out as they sound like they're supposed to play out. Also even the 2009 law builds on a law from 2000 that was adopted in connection with Sweden's participation with the recognition of the European Charter for Regional and Minority Languages. So it's been an accumulating process to get to this new law. In terms of Sami schools and looking across different national contexts, part of the challenges of working in Sami language revitalization in the schools is that the different national contexts have very different histories of engagement with Sami and with Sami in education. And this sort of summarizes very briefly some of those differences. Variable support for Sami rights, variable support for Sami language revitalization. So Norway is usually looked at as having the most progress in recognizing Sami in education and in preparing teachers to teach through the medium of Sami. They even have a primary teacher training program at what's called the Sami University College. Neither Finland nor Sweden have teacher training for teachers in the medium of Sami. The whole college is Sami medium. It's way up in the north there. So these give you some of the supports that the different national policies offer. In the case of a review of the ways that Sami is taught in the schools, Vuokko Hirvonen there concluded that Sami schools mainly teach Sami as subject. It's far less frequent to find it used as a medium of instruction. So these are potentially the ways that Sami can be used in instruction in the Swedish schools. It can be used as a language of instruction, and then there's this category of Sami as language subject with all these subcategories in it, and it's immensely complex when people start to explain to me how it's actually used in the schools, and how local municipalities determine how it will be used in the schools. These are some of the options that come up. Okay, so here's a school, it says second author, that's referring to Hanna Autokoski, who you read about in the portraits. This was she's from the town of Autokoski, and her grandfather, or great-grandfather, or great-great-grandfather established the school there. And so the school is still there. And this is one of the schools at which she carried out the comparative study that you read about on literacy practices of youth. These are some of the materials that she found in use in some of those schools. And some, just to give you a little bit of the context there. A little bit of the very far north scenery. This is the tundra that I'm told the reindeer like to feed on. The stuff covering the rocks, so very, very northern. There's Hanna, and this is her university. And there's the Umeå River, the center of town. Does this help? I don't know, it's sort of fun to watch anyway. This is Hanna with her children that she likes to take. She's always saying that she likes to get them out into nature. That's part of her heritage, and she wants them to be out. And they really do, love it. She's really made that part of their life. This is one of her favorite spots. So, all right, so there's a little bit of a geographic context for these sites of indigenous, geographic and policy context. And here were some ways that I was trying to summarize the different scales of time and space that these languages exist in. I mean, this needs to be much more developed, but I already mentioned how isiZulu and Quechua are spoken by millions, whereas Sami is spoken by, at most 100,000. The Sami languages are also the oldest, as far as I can, as far as my knowledge takes me. They do go back thousands of years, whereas Quechua and isiZulu, I looked just before coming down here because I suddenly realized I don't really know how long isiZulu has been spoken down there. And Wikipedia said, here's what Wikipedia said: Zulu has been spoken in South Africa for a very long time. That was very helpful. I tried to scour it for any further information, but that's all I got. But I do know that it's definitely is part. It is indigenous to that region of the world, and one of the reasons that both isiZulu and Quechua are widely spoken is that they were languages of empire. So it's also interesting to think about the fact that languages that we now know today as marginalized, endangered, I mean, I argue that Quechua is an endangered language, were at one time languages of conquest and being, imposed on speakers of other languages. In the case of Sami, though, it's not clear that they ever imposed their language on anyone, at least to my knowledge. You can correct me if you know more about this. But as nomadic herders, reindeer herders across wide expanses of land, and in part of the world that most people don't really look to live in. Although Hannah claims that she really misses being way up there and in the dark. She loves the dark winters. It's cold, dark. And they've been there for thousands of years, as far as can be documented. So a little bit of difference across the scales of time and space. So here were some of my thoughts about ways that I could reflect on these Indigenous language revitalization contexts and the experiences of the speakers in these contexts today and historically, but thinking more like what things look like today. Certainly globalization and mobility are there in all of these contexts, the impacts of globalization and mobile population. So I'm not even talking really about the diaspora of these populations out to other parts of the world. I'm thinking more in terms of the local contexts. The youth that we encounter these days, and by that I mean they're the youth and their parents, I should say, are in various ways extremely mobile. And so let's say in the case of the Sami, there's a lot of migration to urban contexts. There's been a lot of scholarship on what do Sami youth and Sami speakers, how do they hold on to their identities when they are no longer in the reindeer herding regions. They no longer have the sort of traditional practices of reindeer herding. But yet they still feel themselves Sami. In what ways are they Sami in urban contexts? Others have talked about how reindeer herding itself has changed with the advent of motorized transportation, even helicopters for doing your herding. So people will be living in urban contexts and still have their reindeer herd lands. Maybe they'll have somebody else looking after the reindeer, or they will themselves make periodic trips there. I met one young woman who was working with the Sami parliament in Sweden, and she was in the office of language revitalization, teaching a really interesting kind of heritage language Sami class, which is a whole other topic. But one of the things she told me about was, one of the things I found out is that she is a owner of reindeer, and she's living, outside the reindeer herding area. So for her, it's a constant preoccupation to be going there, be taking care of the reindeer. And this is a somewhat similar phenomenon that happens with Quechua herders from the highlands who migrate to the urban areas or to mines to earn some money, but keep their lands and keep their animals and have to. So there's this very interesting interplay between place, identity, language in the heritage homelands, and then the urban involvement and insertion into national economies. So it's very much a part of, what I'm getting at is it's very much part of indigenous people's lives to be mobile, to experience the effects of globalization in their communities and also in their own life trajectories. Also common across these contexts is something that I'm particularly interested in, how these various multilingual language policies do open spaces, which I've called ideological and implementational spaces, for bringing indigenous languages into the schools and all the questions that raises about, my long-term questions have always been about how can the use of these languages in schools help learners, and also how can the use of these languages in schools contribute to the revitalization of the languages themselves. Those questions are definitely in play in all these contexts. But then sort of moving into this topic of what we call communicative repertoire in my field. Oh, thank you. Which is the idea that, if any of you have taken a course with Betsy Rhymes or Nelson Flores, or me, you've encountered this concept. And this is a very interesting tension in indigenous language contexts between the current ways of thinking about language not as isolable entities, this is English, this is Sami, this is Spanish, whatever. But that most of us in our language practices are drawing more and more in this world where so many of us are multilingual, drawing on different communicative resources as we interact with others. So we might be so-called mixing languages, we might be borrowing words, there are different levels at which we bring together different multilingual resources in our communication, and we've taken to calling this our communicative repertoire, so we sort of try to think about how learners and speakers use their communicative repertoires to communicate rather than how they use Sami or English or whatever. So when Hannah's looking at writing practices for multilingual youth, part of they're sort of bridging both of these ways of thinking about language. They're both trying to look at the use of Sami for writing as Sami language, but they're also recognizing that these youth are sometimes drawing on other language resources as they write in Sami. I don't know if I'm making much sense, but this is very much a part of what's happening in language use and in language learning in these contexts. And then there's English. I called it English inroads. English making itself felt in all around the world, and certainly in these contexts as well. When I was doing my initial dissertation research in the highlands of Peru in the 1980s, early 1980s, English was definitely, talked about and known about, and in fact it was even taught in these remote schools, taught in very formulaic and reduced ways by teachers who could only try to read the words that they were given on their curriculum and make the kids repeat them. So kids would ask me about English and they would be curious about it, but it wasn't present in their environment the ways it is now through all the internet resources and also through all the mobility that they and their families have. So I've certainly witnessed in that context from the 1970s to the present how English has become much more of a presence in remote highland communities of the Andes. And in Bolivia, where in the 1990s they had the education reform for bilingual intercultural education that led to the master's program that Neri was studying in. By the end of the 1990s, and when Evo Morales was elected, who I'm sure you've heard of, the president of Bolivia, he was talking about a trilingual policy, moving from indigenous language and Spanish to then saying we need to also include English. So, and I'm sure you know contexts all over the world where the same kind of, well, certainly in Asia, We have lots of evidence of English making inroads. So that's present in these communities as well. And then the whole area of, given that mobility, the globalization, the emergence of communication that is much more fluid and multilingual, and also the insertion of English there, how is it that Indigenous languages, as Indigenous languages, are still very much felt to be something that people want to hold on to, promote, identify as Sami, as isiZulu, etc. In apparent contradiction to the quest for English and greater socioeconomic mobility, and how that kind of activism is so closely tied to identity, which is obviously something that I'm very interested in, as you read in my papers. So those are some of the things that I think are common across these contexts, and I'm hoping that we can talk and reflect more about that together. I think this is maybe my last slide. Let's see. Yeah. And I already told you this part. The whole thing about, and that some of these questions came up at lunch too, that my way of engaging in these contexts has been ethnographic, or what I also have, in the Andes, clearly ethnographic. In South Africa and Sweden, much more along the lines of what I, in the paper, was calling ethnographic monitoring, which is, it is still long-term in the sense that, I've been going to South Africa since the 1990s and working with people there and have made several trips to Sweden, but it's not ethnographic in the sense of the sort of traditional idea of living and working and being in a place for months at a time, as I have done in the Andes. So that's something that I would like to reflect more about if I write a book, these different scales of engagement in different contexts and what that has meant. So I guess I'm raising both some methodological questions and also, at lunch someone was asking, and how does that relate to policy making, and how do policymakers receive the kinds of ethnographic work that you've been doing? So there's the methodological thing, and then there's the more thematic content topics about what's happening in these contexts with the languages, with the policies, with education, with the people. So I hope that gives enough of something for us to start from, to talk about and reflect. I know that you all have, you bring with you rich experiences of diversity and multilingualism. You're also, many of you, heading off to internships, often with policy bodies, and I guess in many cases working in education, but possibly in other realms. So I expect that you have a lot of thoughts on these topics that I'd love to hear from you.
Well, terrific. Let me make a small intervention. I noticed that coffee has now come, and we don't want to be left with like huge amounts of fudge and brownies. So what if we take a 30-second break? For those who want to come up and get some coffee, now's a good time to do it.
Yeah, I'll do that.
And you can do that too. And then we have 4 questioners. You,
right.
Rachel, Jiri, and you, Chen.
That's great.
Who will be prepared to ask questions to start out.